Kia ora and welcome to episode 48 of Bridge Talks Business with Milford. Here's some fast facts on retirement. You'll get around $520 a week from the pension for a single person after tax, but according to Massey University, you'll need more than $770 a week for a comfortable lifestyle with choices in a metro area. Now, according to my maths, you'll be about $250 a week short. So what makes up the difference? KiwiSaver? Investments? On this episode, I'm interviewing Jane Wrightson, the Retirement Commissioner, and I have some questions. Is there a magical age that you need to start saving or investing to fill that gap? First, here's your top 5 business bits. Number 1, in the US, inflation up but less than feared, so investors take it as a win. Core inflation running at 3% year on year. Tariffs starting to bite but remain pretty modest. Non-tariff related prices are a bit stickier than expected. Number 2, labour market data has been revised down there. The economy creating fewer jobs over the past 18 months than they previously thought. That means fewer jobs. Some companies might start shedding, laying off workers. Number 3, and that concern is showing up in consumer sentiment, with more people worried about job security. Add in the inflation woes and a period of stagflation is a real possibility. Number 4, the European Central Bank held rates steady last week, even as they revised their inflation forecast lower. This week, the US Federal Reserve is tipped to cut rates 0.25% because they're worried about jobs or Trump's wrath, or both. Inflation is running above target, so one could come to their own conclusions. And number 5, back home, Q2 GDP data is out this week and will likely give up gains made in Q1. Across the ditch, we get monthly Australian employment data, which will likely show it humming along quite nicely. So let's crack into today's episode, and I'm joined by Jane Wrightson, who's the Retirement Commissioner. Just a reminder, this segment is informational only and should not be considered financial advice. Jane, welcome to the show. Great to have you.
Thank you very much. Delighted to be here.
Right, there's so much I want to ask you about retirement and KiwiSaver and NZ Super. Let's start with NZ Super. How affordable is it? We've seen lots of politicians come out with lots of headlines. How affordable is it at the moment?
We are sitting bang smack in the middle of the OECD average. So that's the good news, right? So at the moment, it's about 4 point something or other percent of GDP. It's going to go up to about 6.5 in the next 20 years. That's minus tax. And I always think you should take the tax off, because let's talk about net figures, not gross figures. And that number is about halfway OECD average. So it's affordable if we want it to be. This is more about government spending choices than it is about sending the country broke.
Okay, but we also have health to think about from a government perspective, right?
We do.
There's lots of other things at play. Lots of other countries have put the age up. Do you reckon we should?
Again, we're about in the middle. Most other countries are not at 65 yet. Australia is 67 and means tested, it's true, with a very healthy retirement savings scheme. UK has just gone up to 67. They went up too quickly. So interestingly enough, the number of women who plunged into pension poverty within a year rose like that because they didn't give the long runway. But, you know, 65 is about in the middle. In the European countries, they're still at their 60, 62, 63 levels. So they're the ones going up the more rapidly.
What about our pension system do you like? What are the successes of it?
The pension, it's the retirement income system, as I like to think of it. So you've got the NZ Super on one side and KiwiSaver on the other, and they're kind of intertwined. And you have to think of them collectively because it's important. The strengths of NZ Super are that it's universal. You've only got to satisfy some residency requirements. Available to everybody at 65. It's not means tested, which means it's very simple to administer. So those are its strengths. Its weaknesses are, is 65 the right number? Yep, always a question. Is means testing a fairer way of looking at any change as opposed to raising the age? Another good question. That's more expensive, but it's probably fairer. And if you're going to change things around NZ Super, you should also be thinking about the incentives and other nudges around KiwiSaver, because they're two sides of the same coin. NZ Super, if you like, is your minimum basic income. And KiwiSaver and your other savings is the private provision, is what you've got on top, which will get you closer to the standard of living you enjoyed while you were employed. That's pretty much how you do it.
Okay, it's interesting because you say the standard of living you enjoy when you're employed, and I think that's what most people want, is to continue. And there's lots of research done about a no-frills retirement or, a slightly bougier retirement with some restaurants, maybe a holiday overseas once a year. There is a gap between what you get paid in super and even the most basic income, living standards, right?
You can live on NZ super. 40% of people do. 40% of current pensioners live on NZ super, and another 20% live on just a little bit more. So that's 60% of current pensioners living, on a very modest income, basically. But you're right, there's not much room for frills. It depends on who you are and where you are as to whether you can make that work. If you're healthy, if you're got public transport options, if you can grow your own vegetables, for instance, if your own needs are quite small, then it's entirely doable. If you have higher aspirations, then absolutely that's when private savings provision comes into full swing. You need to be able to save and build up your own nest egg to afford the nicer things of life.
Which is where KiwiSaver comes in, although it's not compulsory, so you don't have to make contributions to it. So is there a magical age? I'm 37. Is there a magical age at which you think, I was listening to a guy in the US who was saying it's sort of late 20s, you should have started saving or investing, putting something away for your retirement. What's your advice?
I think it's from the first pay packet. As ridiculous as it sounds.
Really?
Because the first pay packet, do you not remember, for that week or two, it's the most money you've ever had, right? You go,
True.
Oh my God, I've got all this money. And then with about 6 months, you go, oh my God, I don't have enough money. Now, what's changed? It's you and your spending habits that have changed, right? So along with paying off any debt you've got, like student debt, I reckon you should be putting in a good chunk of money, let's say it's maybe 5%, into KiwiSaver from the get-go. Because you won't miss it at the first pay packet, right? You just won't. And while that looks like a ridiculously long timeline for retirement, don't forget that KiwiSaver also helps you get into your first home.
True.
So that's why it should be of interest to young people. So I go first pay packet.
All
Absolutely.
right. Geez, I thought late 20s was pushing it.
If you haven't started by your late 20s, get cracking.
The other thing about KiwiSaver, I mean, with the compulsion issue, do you as Retirement Commissioner have a view on whether we make it compulsory, whether we need to up those contributions?
I'm ambivalent about compulsion. I used to think it was a good idea until I started doing some data research. And generally speaking, the people who are not contributing are either poor or having a life crisis or are children or are not in work, right? So they can't. If you were to make it compulsory, I think what you would see is a correlating rise in the number of hardship applications to get the money back out again. So that's a kind of lose-lose, right? In other words, people who are in KiwiSaver are in, and once they're there, it's sticky, they'll stay and then stop if they need to hold the money for a bit and then carry on, so that's good. Contributions is always a great discussion. In Budget 25, the government took one of our recommendations from a year or two back and said they would slowly increase it from 3+3, employer-employee, to 4+4. That's a good move. There's debate now about whether 4+4 is the right number, particularly since they reduced the government contribution at the same time, which we hadn't quite predicted. And they halved it for many and abolished it for some. So is the number 5+5? Is the number 6+6? It kind of depends who you are. But 4+4 as a minimum basis with options to increase is a very good start.
Can you tell us about some of the income policy work that your department's currently working on?
We're just, in about a month, we'll be publishing a triennial review of inter-retirement income policies. The government of the day commissions us to do it every 3 years under statute. We look at various issues around pension saving, retirement income per se. We're taking a quite deep dive into demographic data this time. I'm particularly interested in looking at women's data and implications for women's retirement and what we might be able to do about that, because women retire, generally speaking, with less income. Gender pay gap turns into the retirement savings gap, it's very clear.
And they live longer.
And we live longer, that's exactly right. So less money, longer to fund. Very tricky, hard stuff. The answer to that is women have to be really aware of this, because I didn't become aware of any of this until I got this job. I wasn't listening, I wasn't thinking. So the consciousness raising around this space is really important. And that also then applies to employers and partners and interested people. If you're a man, you should be thinking about your mother, sister, wife or daughter. Is there something you could be doing around their saving that would help? And the answer is that yes, there are things you could do if you're able to. So that's good. So we'll look at that. We'll have a few recommendations around KiwiSaver, and we'll be really talking about the need for cross-party support for a longer term approach. The worst thing you can do in this system is to tinker. Yeah, everybody hates it. Tinkering is the easiest thing to do when you're in a government because it allows you to tick something off, at least get something done through the great blancmange of activity in a government space. But it's really important for trust and confidence in the system and for good settings and good outcomes that the main parties and as many of the minor parties who will agree can set a long-term direction for where we want to go. And that's good for us, the citizens, because it gives us a timeline.
And certainty. You need certainty.
You need certainty.
And once you reach a certain age, and I feel like I'm kind of at that age now where I'm going, I really need to be seriously thinking about it.
Yeah.
And not thinking, but doing something about it. So
you only still thinking about it?
No, don't worry.
This is good.
Milford's got me on lockdown.
Milford should have you absolutely sorted out.
All right, so just one of the things that gets raised with me by people who are around my age is I'm not really thinking too much about my retirement because people are working so much longer, but we're also living longer, right? So does that really affect, or does it come into your equations that you're looking at?
Well, people don't generally start thinking about it seriously, really, I think, until their 50s. So there's two things here. One is the financial provision you make throughout your life. That's one thing. But the next thing is, what are you going to do when you're heading towards the end of your working life? And you can decide where that is if you're lucky, if you're not laid off, if you don't have an accident, if you don't just wear out. If you've got agency over that, you can decide when you want to stop working. And the ideas around that are all, but particularly for people who have worked their whole life, is finding out in your own mind what it is you want to do. Because work and its structure takes so much of our thinking, doesn't it? And you see this in male stats a lot. The stories are real, that a man stops working at 65, 67, drops dead in 6 months' time. Just kind of lost it, So thinking about how you might step down, thinking about whether you've got a second career in you, not too late. If you hate what you're doing now in your 40s and 50s, then now's the time to get out and do something you love,
Yeah.
Thinking about the more holistic things. So it's not just about financial provision, it's about how do you want to live your life.
That's great advice. I've never really thought about it like that, but it does take up so much of your headspace, doesn't it? Is there anything from your own financial planning or retirement planning journey, or lack thereof, I don't know, that you wish you'd done differently over the years?
The thing about working for the Retirement Commissioner, and all my staff say it too, is that you learn so much, So I've said it before that I look at the 20-something Jane and just put my head in my hands and go, oh God. But don't forget, that was at a time where financial advice was expensive, it was exclusive. Advisors are only really interested in you if you had any money, and of course in your 20s you don't much, So I made a couple of really bad decisions back then, not the least of which was walking out of an employer scheme because I thought I would never work in that sector again.
You cashed in?
I cashed in.
Oh.
I did. I cashed in. I bought a car because I needed the car. And then 3 years later, I was back in that sector and went, oh dear. Oh. And this is one of the beauties of KiwiSaver. It's portable. So that KiwiSaver solved that problem of moving sectors. Before then, your choices were, you only really had an employer scheme if you worked for a large employer, if you worked for the finance sector, if you worked for the government. Everybody else had nothing.
And now everybody has a chance.
Everybody's got a chance.
And that was Jane Wrightson, who's the Retirement Commissioner, with a few words of wisdom for you on this episode. Just a reminder, you can like, follow and subscribe this podcast wherever you like to listen. We enjoy you doing so. Until next time, don't forget, invest in yourselves.